Thanks everyone for joining. The meeting is being recorded, and so we can go ahead and just get started. Uh, Today we're going to be going over a recap of phase one of the wastewater needs assessment, as well as a preview of what we're calling phase 2B of phase two, which is starting from July 2025 and will go until June 2027. And the unsewered model is part of phase 2B, and the University of Massachusetts is leading this effort, and they'll get into it in the second half of the presentation. But first, I'll pass it to Danya Jemerson on our team to introduce board member Nicole Morgan.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I am Danya Jimerson, a senior engineer with the Division of Water Quality and leading the wastewater needs assessment effort from the State Water Board's perspective. The Wastewater Needs Assessment Advisory Group, as you know, plays a vital role in shaping this entire initiative, and the Water Board staff are present at all of these meetings to show their continuous support, highlight the importance of this work, and offer collaboration in wherever is needed. So we are pleased to be joined today by State Board members Nicole Morgan and Laurel Firestone. We appreciate Member Firestone's participation today and her strong leadership in always advocating for the human right to water, promoting sanitation equity, and supporting communities of concern. I would like to also acknowledge board member Morgan, whose extensive background, as we know, in permitting, compliance and enforcement, financial assistance, bring invaluable perspective to this effort. And her insight is particularly relevant as we reflect today in phase one completion and begin charting the course for phase two. So with that, I would like to invite Member Morgan to share her thoughts on her involvement with the advisory group and her ongoing commitment to the wastewater needs assessment goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Danya. I appreciate all of your efforts in this very exciting, I'm not sure, I don't want to call it a program, but just this effort that the Water Board is undertaking, for me, it's very much so a long time overdue. So just really want to thank everyone for their time and their valuable input to support the wastewater needs assessment. Although this advisory group is not a decision-making or direct advisory board to the State Water Board, your feedback to the team is deeply appreciated and will be thoughtfully considered as phase two begins. Once the final report is completed. So a board informational item was presented on July 16th. Thank you for everyone who came to Sacramento to present that to the board. It was a great presentation, really went over all of the hard work that everyone has put in so far and also highlight the work that is upcoming. So the board expressed strong appreciation for the contributions. So that was not just me, it came from all board members and the support of the Wastewater Advisory Group. Although the presentation was scheduled for 15 minutes, the discussion extended nearly 2 hours, really demonstrating the board's strong interest, especially in the upcoming facilities list, the inadequacy categorization, and the opportunity to clarify the cost assessment process and potential solutions. The phase one report marks a major milestone for the wastewater needs assessment team. It is currently undergoing internal review by executive management and the board members. So do apologize, that is taking a little bit of time. There's a lot that went into that phase one report. You all worked on it for months, and so all the board members were all getting caught up to where you are with all of your input, and all of the steps that have been taken over this past. I mean, I believe it's been over a year now, that you guys have done. So board is really diving in, getting caught up, getting up to date on that. And so the project team is expecting to share the final draft version with you by early fall. So phase 2 presents both exciting opportunities and challenges. I always say when there is an opportunity, where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. So challenges are not bad things; they're great, because we have opportunities there. And you turn over a rock, you always have another opportunity. So a key focus will be filling the major data gaps and using a predictive model, which I am so beyond excited for, which was developed by UMass, which we'll hear more about today, to identify likely on-site system locations, particularly in unsewered areas. These tools must be detailed and replicable. I cannot speak this morning. I apologize. We have to be able to replicate the tools. And so, really excited that you all will be weighing in on this, and that California is, we're a leader in this area. We're helping UMass to help develop this tool so that it can not only be used here in California, but it can be used nationwide, especially given the uncertainty of resources beyond 2027, the project end date. We want to make sure that we're able to continue to implement all of the tools and the great work that you are helping us to set up. So with that, I want to start diving into the presentation and the conversations for today. I thank you all again. So excited for this work and appreciate all of your valuable input. As always, please ask questions, please share, because all of your voices are so valuable to this ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Morgan. We appreciate your continued support through this project. And it was so great to meet you and see you in person last week. Now I think I'll pass it on to Greg to do a brief overview of phase 1 and major milestones.
Yeah, thanks, Oriana. And Board Member Morgan already covered a lot of this, so I don't want to belabor the point. Again, we're in phase 2 now, as of July 1st, of a 4-year project. We wrapped up phase 1, and we've delivered a report on phase 1 to the board, which the board is reviewing and hopes to be able to release, first of all, to you all, and then eventually to the public here soon. And today, a lot of what we're doing, even though we're done with phase 1, is giving you a more detailed update on, more work and depth and breadth, especially to phase 1D, as on inadequacy and risk definitions, as well as the phase 1E solutions and cost framework. Again, along with a more detailed discussion on the UMass unsewered model. Move to the next slide. I think you all know this, but again, the purpose of the wastewater needs assessment, it has a lot of purposes, but the overarching goal of the assessment is to provide information on sanitation needs across California and to develop strategies to address those needs, all to support the water board's water goal and mandate around the human right to water, and to really spur additional attention and investment in this space. Next slide, please. And of course, again, you all have been a big part of that. We've been meeting here for a year, and we will continue to meet over the next 2 years for those who are willing to come along with us for the rest of the ride. Again, quarterly advisory group meetings, as well as office hours in the months where we don't have advisory group meetings. But yeah, it'll look very similar. And as I said at the informational item, presentation last week, which by the way is online on YouTube, and it's a full, I think, hour and a half. It turned out to be between presentation, but mostly discussion among the board members on this project. But the phase two is really the fun part, especially I think for you all, where we get to really start sharing more results and yeah, discussing those and putting those together into the final report and the full first wastewater needs assessment through June 2027. Next slide, please. But yeah, we're here first to give you, again, we're not going to go into all the details that we did previously, but give a sort of overview around the key components of the work more quickly on phase 1Bs, especially, and phase 1C. But then because we didn't have a chance to share all the details and all the development, including revisions based on your input to phase 1D and 1E, we'll give more time to that now. Next slide, please. And yeah, the final thing I have to say before handing it off to my colleagues at the Office of Water Programs to talk about phase 1C is to, I guess, remind you or announce, if you all didn't see it, that the two phase 1B reports, the baseline study reports, are the full reports are now out. They're published. They're also in your email inbox. So we're very happy to be able to share those in advance again of the rest of the phase 1 report. So that's especially first and foremost the baseline survey that our colleagues at UCANR, namely Sam, Erica, and Eric and others, conducted around understanding community-based needs for water-related sanitation access, as well as a spatial analysis and database on key types of communities and housing. And then they continue to carry out, in coordination with the water board and regional boards and other partners, including some of you, a field campaign across the state to further document what folks are facing and what potential solutions are to the needs identified. So that's, again, the report's out. If you have any questions about where it is, we can point you to it. But I think, yeah, Ariana's already put the links in the chat. And then UCLA, namely Ariana and myself, also conducted a baseline assessment of existing data sources and methodologies to inform the wastewater needs assessment. Again, there's a full report, 60-page report on that, that kind of documents which data sources we were able to use, which directly compare to the data sources used on this project, which don't, and is a review, again, to inform the rest of the project. But yeah, very happy to share with you these full reports. And if you have any questions about those or comments, we certainly welcome those, especially at the next office hours, which I believe is only 3 weeks or so away. So look forward to getting into that with folks who'd like to chat about it. But with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Dakota to, again, give a recap on phase 1C, sort of the data collection effort.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Greg. Hey, good morning, everyone. You probably haven't heard from me in a while. My name's Dakota Keene. I'm a geologist at the Office of Water Programs. And so I'll be giving you a recap on the phase 1C data collection effort. And I'm just going to go over things quickly. You've all seen this information before, and I really want the other teams to have plenty of time to discuss what they've been working on and then to answer the questions that you're going to have. So ultimately, what we came up with in the data collection effort is a first of its kind methodology to determine whether or not a given facility is actually treating domestic sanitation related wastewater. There's a lot of different kinds of wastewater out there, as some of you know, and we really wanted to dial in on the types of wastewater that are generated within the purview of the wastewater needs assessment. Out of that methodology, we were able to develop a final list of treatment facilities and collection systems that will be assessed for both inadequacy and risk of inadequacy for this inaugural wastewater needs assessment. To support other activities, we also collected a large amount of geospatial data sets that will inform potential impacts to groundwater and also help us develop solutions for those facilities and systems that are deemed inadequate. To support the costing of those solutions, we also went through a huge amount of state-funded projects and poured over engineering reports to collect data related to costs, both at large and small scales. And then finally, through all of this, we identified specific data gaps to help the state and regional boards kind of beef up their systems, and then also hopefully make future needs assessments go by a little more smoothly. So again, you've seen this diagram before. This summarizes the types of facilities that are included in the needs assessment and those facilities that would be excluded. In general, any kind of public treatment works is included. If there's a private treatment plant, private meaning it's managed instead by a homeowners association or a similar group that serves maybe a mobile home park or something similar. Federal facilities, migrant labor camps, prisons, schools, hospitals, RV parks, anywhere where where a human being is going to be residing for a significant amount of time and generating wastewater, that's what we're interested in. Facilities that are excluded are those that aren't processing sanitary waste directly. So when biosolids are disposed of out in an ag field somewhere, or a treatment facility that is taking already treated wastewater and then using it to generate recycled water, that's not included. Commercial facilities aren't included, and neither are transient uses or private residences. The private residences will be dealt with in a different way that I think either later today you'll hear about or at another advisory group meeting. So the facilities list, which is the main result of this huge effort that we engaged in, there are 2,657 facilities that my colleagues will be assessing for inadequacy and risk of inadequacy, spread throughout the state, all 9 regional boards. They have their work cut out for them. The majority of these are WDR facilities, meaning that the wastewater is being discharged to land in some fashion. Followed up by the number of collection systems that are individually permitted by the State Water Board, and then finally the MPDES systems that discharge to waters of California, so lakes, streams, or the ocean. And then I wanted to include this figure just to show the breadth of data sources that we're going after. We weren't just looking at treatment facilities. Well, that's obviously very important to the goals of the needs assessment. There are a ton of supporting data sources that we had to go to, and I want to extend special thanks to both the regional water boards for helping provide us with data, helping us perform QA/QC on our data, and then to CASA for providing us with a number of sewer shed boundaries of their member agencies. There's a lot of work that went in there, so we appreciate their help. I don't have too much more to say here other than we really appreciate your attention and thanks for spending Friday morning with us. So I'll just pass it on to the next team unless there's a pressing question that I can answer.
Thanks, Dakota. Yeah, if there's any questions on phase 1C, of course, we have office hours, and I believe the calendar invites have been sent to all the advisory groups, and we have the dates incorporated in the slides for other members. Oh, but I see Paul has his hand raised.
Thank you, Dakota, for that presentation. And that covers that. And you said specifically that that excludes odds. Phase 1C in the contract does include odds. Things like the risk of contamination, soil type, surface water, distance to surface water, and those are not being covered, as I understand it, by Amherst. Where and when will those be covered?
So I think what I meant to say when they're excluded from the facilities list is that odds are not being assessed for inadequacy by the UCLA team. They're still being assessed in the scope of the greater wastewater needs assessment, but not to the degree that centralized treatment facilities are, because the data simply isn't available.
Yeah, when will that part of 1C be reported?
So I don't think it's part of 1C. I think I'll have to defer to Greg or Maureen to answer that
Yeah,
question.
I can weigh in. So, Paul, things kind of as we've done, things have kind of morphed, right? And so, Phase 1C really ended up focusing primarily on the NPDS, WDR, and SSGO facilities or systems. And so we still, had coordinated, we're still kind of gathering data for on-site systems, but we're not really including that in reporting for Phase 1C. That information and all the data and stuff that we're collecting is coming in really more on the Phase 1E, which is the solutions and cost assessment. So even Phase 1C was, data gathering and that, but it really ended up focusing on the systems and the collection systems and treatment facilities. And then the whole OTS piece is really being handled more when we focus in on solutions and costs and that. So you'll see in our report that comes out, we cover it there.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Also in the groundwater impacts assessment, which is technically part of Phase 1D, although, I mean, the phases matter, especially for us, but those numbers are going to disappear really in the final report because it's all going to be part of one product. But yeah, thank you for that question or comment.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Maureen and Greg, for clarifying. And then it is important for us to distinguish that while we did collect supporting data sets in Phase 1C, as Greg and Maureen suggested, really the work is going to occur in Phase 1D and Phase 1E there.
Thank you, Paul, for your question. I can hand it over to Grace to go over Phase 1D.
I think I'm going to actually take the first few slides and then Grace will do most of the exciting part. And I just want to say also, yeah, we wanted to give you a quick recap again on the first few phases or tasks of Phase 1, but now we're entering into more substantial updates on inadequacy and risk and then costs and solutions. And there are discussion, built into that time, but this is really new information and also especially on the UMass work. But I'm going to quickly just remind folks of what the inadequacy and risk assessments are, and then Grace will get into the details and really the updates we've done. So if we can move to the next slide. And we did present the initial details and overview in January. So this is an update, and this is what this segment of the meeting, the presentation is going to be on. We can move to the next slide. Again, just as a reminder, on the terminology, it is a lot, we recognize that, but the inadequacy and risk assessment is really being applied to 3 different types of facilities or systems: the NPDS, or those with a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, the WDR, which are systems or facilities regulated by the waste discharge requirements around discharges to land, as well as what we are now calling, in order to avoid confusion with sanitary sewer overflows, we're calling it SSO, now we're calling it SSSGO, collection systems, essentially, that are regulated by the Sanitary Sewer System General Order, which is how you get that acronym. Next slide, please. I do want to remind folks that we're actually more or less conducting 6 different assessments here on inadequacy and risk, because we recognize each of the 3 facility types or systems are in some ways similar, but in many ways very different. And so the factors that go into inadequacy and risk of inadequacy are different for each. Again, there's some overlap, especially in the risk methodology, but there will be separate calculations for inadequacy for each of the 3 types, as well as the risk methodology, again, is distinct from the inadequacy methodology, and will be calculated separately for every facility and system that's on the final list of facilities and systems. And again, Grace will provide more details, and all the details on the criteria are both in the phase one report, and I believe there was an attachment with those details as well in the packet that you got for today's meeting. Next slide, please. And yeah, we've done a lot of work, especially Grace and others, integrating feedback from you all that we got on the inadequacy and risk criteria when we first presented it in January. We've continued to meet with the internal working group of board staff experts on these types of systems and facilities to update the inadequacy criteria. We've begun sort of piloting, actually running, operationalizing the criteria, especially for, again, sorry, what we're here calling SSGO systems. And again, we've submitted, as I've already said, a full sort of chapter on this in the phase one report. Next slide. And again, we anticipate that even though we're trying to give as much of an update as we can here, provided in the attachments, some folks will want to dive into the details even more. So we encourage you to attend office hours on these dates the next 2 months to discuss this because we will make time for that. And I think now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Grace Harrison, to get us into the detailed updates.
Thanks, Greg. So yeah, the first thing I just wanted to note is the attachment that Greg is referring to is sort of it's an additional set of slides that have full tables and some extra slides that contain details on all of the inadequacy and risk criteria. It's too much to include in this shorter presentation today, but if you are interested, I believe those slides were sent in the email that you received from Annie Young. So you could go and look there as I go through my more simplified slides today. So this is the meeting map. We're going to start with the inadequacy criteria and then go through the 3 different facility and system types, and we'll do the same thing for the risk criteria. All right, so for SSGO, again, these are our collection systems regulated by the Sanitary Sewer System General Order. We made a lot of updates to this criteria based on feedback that we received from you all at the advisory group and also feedback from our internal working group. And this criteria is still under development, but as it stands today, we are presenting it so that if a system has met the inadequacy criteria for 2 or more of the criteria that is going to be presented, then that system would be flagged as inadequate. So it's not just you have to meet 1, you would have to meet multiple as a collection system. And then currently all of the criteria presented are weighted equally. Again, this could change in the future based on some feedback that we are sort of actively working through. But I just wanted to highlight that that is how the criteria is presented today. That's how I'll move through it. And then I've also I think the next slide shows it. Yeah, I have a column, and we'll go through this as they appear on a screen. But this potential changes column will highlight some things that we're considering changing, such as the way that certain variables are weighted or certain inadequacy criteria are weighted. Anything that you see in red indicates that this has been changed since the last time you saw this criteria. And yeah, we're going to go one at a time. So the first criteria for sanitary sewer systems is related to sanitary sewer overflows. And we're looking at systems that had a greater number of SSOs for their system size than the state average every single year for the past 5 years. So we're trying to identify systems that are consistently having more sanitary sewer overflows than is average for the state. In this potential changes column, I want to highlight that we are considering changing our threshold from right now we have it set as the state average, but we are considering implementing some more dynamic performance bands that would be adjusted, sort of have a high, medium, and low standard, and we'd only be looking at systems that are in that the highest number of sanitary sewer overflows. And that would be, it would not be based on the state average, but rather sort of the mean or the standard deviation of the data as a whole, which is kind of a confusing statistical explanation to get into right now. But this is feedback that we've received that it might be better rather than using a standalone, just like single state average number, to make it a little bit more adaptable and establish some different performance bands. And then you'll notice here it mentions 12-month and 5-year rolling averages. This is not, I would say this is hopefully not too confusing, but looking at the average number of sanitary sewer overflows in a 12-month period for a system, and then again that number for a 5-year period. So rather than using, once again, just like a single number, trying to look at multiple different calculations and identify systems that are having the highest number of sanitary sewer overflows, both within the last year, but also over a 5-year period. Okay, and whoops, where am I? Sorry, I was trying to, there we go. The next criteria is focused on spill recovery. So this percent has been increased from 50% of a spill being recovered to, or a spill being unrecovered to 75% of a spill being unrecovered. So a more significant percent. And then we changed this wording to be specifically focused on whether or not the spill reached surface water. And then we added some language about whether or not the spill occurred during a 1 in 100-year storm or some other extreme event. This is the first criteria. You'll notice that we have this comment about treating it as a secondary criteria, which is getting to my comment about the potential change in weighting of criteria. Because it's obviously very difficult, it can be very difficult to recover 100% of a spill, especially a large spill. And so we've received feedback that this may be better as sort of a secondary criteria that we could apply if we needed to further narrow the list of inadequate collection systems. All right, the next criteria are focused on reporting. So this one has not changed at all. We're looking at systems that have not submitted a sewer system management plan in the last 6 years, or if their existing plan is more than 6 years old. This is the second reporting criteria, and this is looking at systems that have not submitted any certification of having no spills that month for an entire year. So essentially, collection systems are supposed to certify that they've had no spills and submit that certification every month that is the case. So if a system is not certified that they have had 0 spills for an entire year, and they're also reporting 0 spills, these together essentially it indicates that either the system is not reporting anything, or maybe they're just not reporting their no spill certifications, but something has gone awry in the reporting realm. And then the third reporting criteria is related to annual reports. So if a system has not submitted an annual report for the last year, that would get flagged. And so currently these are all proposed as their own individual criterion, but what we are considering is combining these 3 reporting criteria into one combined variable, so that only collection systems that meet the criteria for all 3 of these would be flagged as inadequate. So again, making that criteria more difficult to reach, hopefully identifying the most seriously inadequate systems. And then our last two types of criteria in here are related to NOVs and enforcement orders, and these really haven't changed. The one thing I want to note is that we are also considering treating these as secondary criteria, similar to this spill recovery variable that I mentioned. So again, that's something that we're considering adjusting the weighting for, but these are pretty much the same that you have seen before. So I know that's a lot of information. I apologize, we have to move through them quickly, but we did leave time for 10 minutes for feedback if people have questions, comments they want to share, and then we'll have to move on. Please ask away. Debbie, yeah.
Grace, first, thank you. I'm loving to see the progress. I like that idea of combining the reporting parts together. I think that really does a better job than individually of identifying systems with issues. And just on the first one, and I know that you've talked to different people, is what we've noticed is that if you can identify those systems that are like if you're very small and you do the spills per 100 miles, you can have one spill that just kind of sends you way up there. And so sometimes you use the word banding, but sometimes we'll categorize them based upon system size as a way of saying, hey, is this, because you don't want to just say, oh yeah, you're small, you had one spill, you're now inadequate, or that was, super problematic. And then the other area that we've really looked at too is what can skew the results is whether or not system owns a lateral or partially owns a lateral, or they own the whole lateral, and if that's in the system. And so I know with the new order, it's very much divided, but that has been something that we also know can make it so that you're not doing an apples to apples comparison. So, but otherwise, I super like that idea about the reporting part. I think that's a really good way to give it some balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your comment about the system size. I remember talking about that before, and yeah, I'll look at how we can do that, or at least consider doing it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Jared?
Hi, good morning. Great presentation, Grace, and just wanted to echo Debbie's feedback in terms of that approach of combining them. I feel like this will go a really long way in terms of setting that bar at the right spot, so you really will capture the intended folks that need the support, the needs assessments kind of geared towards. And I also think it will really support drawing that line and not miscategorizing agencies is inadequate. And then likely down the line will, reduce the amount of work you'd have to do to work through the list further to identify that. So really great changes, and appreciate all your time and effort and getting these organized and getting them in there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the feedback. And I'd say if anyone on the advisory group has questions about how these things are measured, or what any of this terminology means, I'd be happy to answer questions of that nature too, because I know this can get really technical, can be confusing. So happy to break down through what any of this means if people have questions. Okay. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep moving on. But yeah, I know this can be technical, and I want people to feel that they can ask questions. So if you have a question, it is most likely that someone else has a question, and I'm happy to answer it. All right, so those are our collection systems. I'm feeling, really happy with the feedback we've received from all of our advisory group members, and I think we're going to be able to produce a list that is, targeted and hopefully helpful to the State Water Board. So that's great. We're going to move on to our NPDES facilities, and this criteria really hasn't changed since the last time we presented it in January. In some ways, the NPDES facilities are the easiest because they are regulated federally, or they have to comply with federal regulations. And so there's a lot more data and sort of standards that have already been established for years that we're able to just sort of tap into and utilize for this assessment. The most relevant for us is this designation of significant noncompliance that EPA uses. And this is a designation that they use to identify systems that have the most serious level of violations, and indicating if those violations are posing a threat or a severe level of concern for the environment or the facility itself. And so let's walk through what this criteria entails. But again, this is similar. This has not changed. These are the exact same slides since January. So we're looking at a system would be identified as significantly non-compliant, or in our case, we're calling inadequate, if they have not submitted a DMR for more than a month. If they have failed to meet some sort of permit compliance schedule milestone. So maybe it was stated that in order to remain in compliance with their permit, that the facility needed to do something by a certain time. If they've missed that deadline, then that would flag them as significant non-compliance. Same as if they violate a formal enforcement order. So not only that the enforcement order has been issued, but then that they've also violated that enforcement order, that would be flagged. And then for effluent violations, we're looking at systems that have had significant effluent violations in 2 or more months over a 6-month period. So it's sort of a condensed series of violations, effluent violations. And then for violations in general, if any type of violation has occurred for 4 or more months in a row and has not been resolved, that also gets flagged and would be considered significantly non-compliant by EPA. So we're taking this criteria that they've applied. They've already, they're working on flagging systems every quarter. And the State Water Board works to do that and submit that data to EPA. And so we're taking the work that's already been done there and essentially taking those systems that have been flagged and calling them inadequate, because it doesn't really make sense for us to make a completely new set of criteria when EPA and the State Water Board have already been working with this criteria for decades. So that's our plan. The only area that we're potentially going to be adding to is looking at systems that have open enforcement orders. And these are the types of enforcement orders that we are considering. Oops, sorry. And so that would be the only sort of additional thing. But the idea is that if a system does have an open enforcement order, it's likely, most likely that it is being flagged as significantly non-compliant, potentially in another way based on this other set of criteria that I just went through by EPA. But the idea here is that maybe we could catch a couple additional systems that aren't being flagged in some other way, but are having significant challenges that would be useful to identify. So if anyone has questions on NPDES facilities or criteria, happy to answer and clarify to the best of my ability. Debbie.
Yeah, Grace, can you go that that one, because I know the state potential, I shouldn't say I know. I'm going to ask you a question as to the state. So this one would say significant effluent violations in 2 or 4 months. So no matter how many significant there are in a month, the next month has to have another significant, right? That's the way that it does that. And then on the chronic, is it a chronic violation or is it the same chronic violation in a month? How's that?
Yes, and I'm not the expert here, but the way I understand it is if it's the same type of chronic, so there's sort of a designation of what is a chronic violation, and then if that is occurring for 4 months in a row, then that would be flagged. So first you have to meet that criteria of what is a chronic violation, based on the type of pollutant it is. I think there's like class A and class B, and then if that violation is occurring 4 more times in a row. Maybe Sharon can be our expert. Feel free to unmute.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
My comment was for the enforcement orders that you listed on the next slide. It seems to me that if a facility is under an enforcement order to correct any of those violations on the prior slide, then that would be more of a deductive criteria. In other words, actions are already being taken to address whatever's, kind of putting you into this inadequacy category. So maybe it's a middle ground kind of designation. In other words, maybe you meet that criteria for SNC, but it's being addressed, as opposed to it's all unaddressed, right? That you're not performing. If you're performing under your enforcement order, it seems like you can kind of check the box that things are, don't need further attention, if that makes sense.
The feedback that I remember receiving from our State Water Board staff members when working on this criteria is that the sort of level of concern that it takes to be able for staff to really take the step to issue one of these enforcement orders is quite significant. And so if any one of these enforcement orders is being issued, then that's indicating something of significant concern is going on, and maybe it hasn't been resolved in other ways. So it was recommended to us to include these by the water board staff because of that. But I hear what you're saying is that if a system is complying with their enforcement order, then it probably doesn't make sense to include them here. So I think the enforcement orders is an area that we need to continue thinking about, but that's the reason that they're here, based on that feedback from the water board staff. And Greg, I saw you unmuted too, so do you want to add anything?
I mean, echoing what you're saying, and also in this case, these criteria are, derived from a federal definition, so there's value in the consistency. But yes, there's a broader sort of issue that the last thing we want to do, or one of the last things we want to do, is identify systems as inadequate that are already, actively, it's clear that they're already actively working on their own solution or being supported to do so. And there's no need for us to identify them, especially to model solutions and do all that work. So we'll be looking to filter out systems on the back end that are already, in the solution process. In this case, I'm not sure it's clear that that's what's happening, but we can and will, after applying the criteria with the water board, state and regional boards, be looking at the list and yes, make sure that we just have an over-identified systems that will be done in multiple layers. But that's all I wanted to say in it. Debbie, you can chime in.
Thanks, Greg. And a little bit was Sharon didn't answer. So if you could find an answer to that, that would be great. Or maybe we can talk about it, or I'll start looking it up because I should know it. But the one thing on this slide that I think on these different enforcement orders that we see, at least I see a lot in the Central Valley, is the time schedule order. And it happens when you can't put in a compliance schedule order because of the compliance schedule policy. And so it basically is hey, this is a compliance schedule. We've got you on the way, and you have new limits within there typically for those type of improvements. And then so when on the backside, when it's like violation of formal enforcement orders, and I'm like, yeah, you don't meet your limits in your time schedule order, that would be the trigger that I would be more concerned about than, oh, they've got violations because of their final, what would be otherwise considered their final effluent limits in a compliant and in permit compliance schedule. So it's just some of the logistics that happen, and that happens sometimes because something either pops up or because the time when it's set versus the time when they got the information to be able to know whether they needed an improvement really didn't provide enough time to actually build the facility. So it does happen, and just to watch for.
Mhm. I looked up oh my gosh, the slides go crazy. I looked up the chronic violation terminology from EPA. I'm gonna put it in the chat. This is not super intuitive language, but that might help a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let's keep moving along unless someone else has comments. We're going to move on to our WDR criteria. Again, these are for facilities that are discharging to land in some way. And I want to start by sort of breaking down the three main parts of this criteria. So the first part is focused on chronic effluent violations. So this is structured very similarly to the NPDES significant non-compliance criteria, in the sense that either you are meeting the criteria that you've had chronic violations, or no, the facility has not met that criteria. The same goes for the enforcement orders. Either yes, you have an open enforcement order, or no, you do not have an open enforcement order. So both of these are binary. And then the monitoring and reporting violations is structured a little differently. What we're thinking at this point is that we have a bunch of different types of monitoring and reporting violations. We want to weight them slightly differently because they're not all sort of to the same level of significance. And so if we can weight, we've established some different potential weights for each type of M&R violation. And then we want to establish a quantitative threshold for inadequacy. So the idea there is that you'd have a number, a score that a system would have to surpass to be flagged as inadequate. And that number would be made up of the multiple different types of monitoring reporting violations, all weighted and then added together. So it's a little bit different than the effluent violations or the enforcement order violations. So here's some examples. This is obviously not all the different types of effluent violations that are out there, but there's too many to list in this presentation. So if you are interested in seeing the specific list of effluent violations, those are included on those additional detailed slides that we were referring to at the beginning of the presentation. And so you'll notice that the percent that the facility has to exceed, or that the effluent measurement has to exceed, is different by effluent or by contaminant type. And so this is based on feedback from water board staff, regional water board staff, WDR staff, who really work with these systems and understand the types of violations that are sort of most critical to the system's functioning and their ability to continue adequately providing, safe sanitation, not harming the environment. So the idea here is that if a system exceeds the limit that is set in the permit by, in this case for E. coli, 20% more in any 2 months in a 6-month period over the last 5 years, that would be flagged as an inadequate, or that would meet the inadequacy criteria. So I know this is maybe a little confusing because we've got different percents here, we've got different violation types. But the idea really is that we're looking for systems that are having consistently exceeding their permit limits over, a 6-month period, and then flagging those systems. Okay, so those are our effluent violations. The other group that I mentioned was enforcement orders. You've seen these all before. Here's our list of enforcement orders that we're considering. I do want to mention that we're looking at both active and historic. And same with NOVs, looking at active and historic. This one is the only place where you'll see in the criteria that says 2 or more. And that's because of the feedback we received from the water board staff. They really encouraged us to increase this from 1 to 2, and so we've done that here. And then again, M&R violations, like I described, these are not binary, so you would we will apply a weight to each specific violation type, and then add up the total score that the facility has received to see if they've crossed that inadequacy threshold. Like I said, we haven't established what that quantitative threshold will be yet, but we'll be working on that in the next few months. And so these are not all of the types of different monitoring and reporting violations that we'll be looking at. If you want to look at those are on the additional slides. But we're looking at if a system is, missing these significant types of required reports, if they are having sanitary sewer overflow violations, and these weights have been established based on the regional water board staff feedback once again. So I can leave time for discussion here from folks that have questions. I'll go back maybe to this slide if folks have questions.
Yeah, I have a question. For me, as far as being an inadequate facility, I would think that sanitary sewer overflows or spills or other violations of constituents would be weighted higher than not submitting a monitoring report.
Okay, that's good feedback.
You know what I mean? Like as an operator, when we're discharging, it's more important to be protecting the environment and people's health. And I think the failure to submit the report, I mean, it could be, showing that you're not submitting for a reason that you don't want to admit that there's fault there or that you have some problems or whatever it is. But I think sometimes smaller agencies, less people, you get something in late, whatever it is, but maybe you don't have violations going out the door and it's weighted higher, because you missed submitting it on time or getting it in. And maybe you don't have violations, or maybe there isn't an inadequacy with the treatment. Whereas, you have an inadequacy with treatment and what's actually being discharged is weighted less than, and you got it in on time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. Debbie?
Yeah, I have a question kind of on that, and what something what Max said is I'm curious because we went over the one for the I like that SSS Geo, right? We went over that. Why is the Senate is this being brought in when it is not when they fall under the threshold of having an independent permit, or is this together? Because it seems like it's that you're assessing the programs differently. And so I'm trying to understand the background of this one.
Yeah, I'll try to answer your question. I think I follow. So you're saying in scenarios where the SSO and the WDR are related, they're connected, why are we not why are we looking at them differently? Is that what you're asking?
Well, this is more on the treatment plant side. So both of them are
Yeah.
WDRs, right? You have both of them are waste discharge requirements, but this is more on the treatment side of the facilities versus the collection side of the facilities. And you're assessing the collection separately. Here's the treatment side. So I'm wondering why that's being brought. I just am trying to understand the background of why, if they're getting assessed on one part, they're getting assessed also here, or is that trying to get to something holistic? And then it kind of goes back towards the question, or back towards that. Maybe I shouldn't say that initially in looking those facilities, if someone's owning, they own a treatment plant, a collection system. I say owning, operating, right? Treatment plant, collection system, these different parts or several, how that falls into place.
Yeah, and are you asking specifically about this sanitary sewer overflow violation?
Yeah,
Okay.
in this category.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great comment. I think the reason it's included here is because in CWICS, there's lots of sanitary sewer overflow violations that are directly related to the WDR facility. So like if you filter for WDRs, you see these types of violations. And so because it's a relevant violation type, we opted to include it here. But I hear what you're saying is that it might not make sense if you're already assessing the collection system portion of the facility, which I think gets at sort of a larger question of whether or not how we want to separate out the full facility sort of system, collection system and permit versus permit piece, because they are related but different. But I can say right now the reason it's here is really because of the organization of CWICS and the way that the violations are associated with the permit type. But I like your comment, and Maureen, I saw you had your hand raised, and I want to give you an opportunity to speak on this too.
Yeah, I think you said it pretty well, Grace. Debbie, what we're seeing is some of the WDRs are written, they might not have a separate SSGO, and so their collection system requirements are embedded in the WDRs. And so I think this is kind of getting at that scenario where the facility has a collection system too, but it doesn't have an SSGO, so the spills wouldn't get captured in that data set, if that helps. But it's a great thing to bring up because we've got a lot of sorting out once we go to solutions, and so that we're not double counting that kind of thing. So we'll have to figure out a method for that.
And that's really where I was trying to get, because if you were trying to get it, I mean, this is going to sound really weird, is whether you're discharged, if it's a holistic problem, right? It's a problem with the entity, and you want to look at both sides. That's a possibility. But that also applies to NPDES too. So, and yeah, these are mainly going to be your under 1 mile private, privately owned versus publicly owned systems. And then with the collection systems, obviously there's some independent ones that are, feed into larger collection systems. So.
And I'd say for both, like folks like, Denny and Mac, that you've even just in these 3 example ones, there's comments about weighting and why it's included. That's really helpful. And so if you do want to take a look at those more detailed slides, I think, you're the type of folks that have done a lot of work on this, that you'd be able to, provide us some nitty gritty details. So I do encourage you to look at those slides. And then Sharon, I think you had your hand raised at one point. I'm still happy to take that question if you have it. Okay, maybe not. All right, we are going to move on then to the risk criteria, or actually first we'll we'll stick with our inadequacy assessment for a second and just discuss our next step. So what you all can expect to see moving forward. So we are obviously nearing the end of this first bullet point where we're developing the inadequacy criteria for our different system and facility types. I still have it included here because we want to get your feedback, and we want to, continue trying to include the feedback. But at some point we got to get to the second step where we're really going to start doing the data analysis and operationalizing the criteria and establishing or creating these initial lists. And so when we have the initial list, we are going to start by sharing the list with the wastewater needs assessment project team. Then it will most likely go to the executive leadership team and to the regional water board so that they can review the lists and let us know if the systems that we've identified seem reasonable, if there's large gaps that we've missed. And then that list will go to you all at the advisory group, which we will we'll present and share on at a future meeting. And then finally, we'll be publishing a public-facing list of these inadequate systems and facilities, but that's really in the final version of the report. All right, so now we're going to move on to our risk criteria, and then we'll close out. Okay, so getting right into another chaotic table, I apologize. But this table is focused on the socioeconomic risk variables for our risk assessment. And so you'll notice in quotations, it's listing what type of system or facility the variable is relevant to. In the case of the socioeconomic variables, these are applicable to all of the system and facilities types, which is really critical for our assessment. And the other column that's probably of interest here is the potential thresholds. And so we've written out to the best of our ability what these risk thresholds would be. So in the case of this first variable, household socioeconomic burden, this is a combined variable. So we're looking at both communities that have a high prevalence of poverty combined with communities that are significantly housing burdened. So they're spending a significant amount of their money, of their income on housing. And so combining those two together to create this household socioeconomic burden variable. And this variable comes directly from the drinking water needs assessment that California has done. And I think it's an interesting variable that I think in many ways is an improvement upon just looking at percent of median household income. Then we've got DAC status and SDAC status. These are just state guidelines of what the statewide MHI, the average state, 80% of the statewide MHI, which is this number, and these have updated for 2023. And then the last one here is race and ethnicity. Currently, we just have the threshold set as sort of majority community of color, but this will probably be developed further, but this is just initial threshold.
Yeah, I do also want to note there that it was emphasized in the informational item that we and the board see this project as advancing the board's racial equity goals. So just do want to note that this is one way among others that the project we're mandated for the project to incorporate movement toward racial equity.
Okay, our next table is focused on the operational risk variables. Again, there's many more variables that you can look at on those more detailed slides, but here's a sort of a tasting platter for you. So we've got percent of the system that's cleaned annually, percent of the system inspected using CCTV, the age of the system, and then the system's governance type. And again, I want to note that these are applicable in some cases only to the collection systems. And that's we should clarify, they're not applicable only to the collection systems, but we only have data for them for a collection system. So although the age of the facility might be important, for a WDR, we don't have data for all of the WDRs, so we can't include it here. Our thresholds we've set as if the system is, if less than 15% of the system is being cleaned annually, then that would be, flagged for risk. If less than 10% of the collection system is being inspected annually, that would be flagged for risk. And if more than 50% of the collection system was built before 1980, flagged for risk. And of course, with this risk concept, risk is a lot more flexible than the inadequacy in the sense that we have the at-risk category, but then we also have potentially at risk and not at risk. So the difference between potentially at risk and not at risk still need, we still need to figure out where that line gets drawn. But you could imagine that, in the case of, let's use the percent cleaned annually, that maybe potentially at risk is if they're hovering at 14 or 15% of the system was cleaned, whereas at risk would be maybe they had only 10% or 8% of the system cleaned. So just acknowledging that, this is not just a black and white binary the same way that inadequacy is. It's more of, you have some steps, not at risk, potentially at risk, and at risk. Okay, environmental is our third category. Whoops, oh my gosh, sorry. Is our third category, and we, again, have more criteria that you can look at on those additional slides. But I wanted to note so if an NPDES facility, because we have more data for the NPDES facilities, we can see if they have been nearing their discharge limits. And so if they have neared their discharge limit or they're nearing a discharge exceedance for more than 2 quarters or 2 or more quarters, and that difference is less than 10%, then that would be flagged for being at risk of exceeding, their discharge limit in the future. We're also looking at whether or not the system or facility is discharging to a 303D impaired water body. And then we've got 2 example climate or environmental risk indicators here, looking at the impact of drought, the impact of flooding. There's some additional ones looking at, wildfire risk impacts to the system and facility from wildfire. So I do encourage you to look through those additional variables if you're interested. And you'll notice we haven't really established a threshold for these in climate risk indicators. So that's something we'll be actively working on in the next few months. And then our last category is public health. And we have only been able to include 1 variable in this public health category, although, really the whole wastewater needs assessment is sort of a public health initiative. But if we're going to split our variable types or group them, only 1 falls directly into the public health category, which is whether or not there's constituents of emergent concern present in the facility or collection system. And this is one that we've talked about in past meetings, and I know we've gotten feedback on, but we still need to sort of work with the data and also, hear more or learn more from the experts in the field about how we can include this work. But because there is data available for constituents of emerging concern from the State Water Board, it does seem worthwhile to include that data in some way. And so this is our variable that we've chosen to include. There were other public health variables, such as I think one was, the presence of septic hauling in a community. But again, because we don't have data for the state of California on that type of public health, issue, we really can't include it in this type of statewide analysis. So of course, there's lots of other relevant public health variables, but this is the one that we do have state data for that we're trying to include. All right, and this is a very similar slide to the inadequacy assessment. But yeah, just going through these steps again, we're continuing to refine our risk thresholds. I'd say this is not as far along as it is in the inadequacy work, so we still have more work to do here in refining the thresholds. So if you do have feedback on some of these risk variables, please share it with us. We are very interested in your thoughts and opinions and trying to incorporate those. And then we'll begin operationalizing and conducting the analysis, creating that initial list of potentially at risk and not at risk, potentially at risk, and at risk systems and facilities. We will share those with you, and then the list will be publicly available and shared in the final report. So I think we've got questions from folks. Jasmine.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I'm with RCAC. I did have a question about the operational risk category, especially when it comes to the CCTV inspections.
Mm-hmm.
How are you expecting to get information on that? Because that should theoretically change on a yearly basis, and the threshold is annually. A lot of agencies we work with, if they're actually good about doing CCTVing, it's once every 5 years because it's what they fit into their 5-year CIP. It's not something that's not a lot of smaller communities have the tools to do that on their own, so they usually have to contract it out. So just kind of asking more context for that.
Yeah.
The annual and expectations for CCTV inspections.
I'm wondering if it makes more sense then, based on what you just said, and if it's less than 10% of the system was inspected in a single year, but we're looking over a 5-year time span. So if in the year that they completed the inspection, if only less than 10% of the system was inspected during that required inspection, that might make more sense. And I don't see why we couldn't do that. I think that's just, similar for the percent of the system cleaned. We could, potentially adjust that so that it's looking over that 5-year time period. So yeah, and the way that we have this data is through the annual reports that the collection systems are submitting to CWICS.
Are those a requirement of the SSMP?
Yes, they should be. Well, it's a requirement of the SSSGO, the order itself, that they submit the annual report.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think, and also something else to note is that when the systems, typically when a system gets CCTV, they also perform the cleaning at the same time so that it can allow easier access for the camera. So I think you'll see systems kind of taking credit for both at the same time when that happens. Okay. And then, again, speaking for smaller communities, sometimes they don't have the means or the equipment to be able to clean a system regularly, or they just have a ditch witch and hotspots that they just, focus on. And sometimes those hotspots aren't, they're not even close to 15% of their system. It's like, right. I know a community with 3,000 connections and they only have 2 restaurants, and those 2 restaurants are one street. And so that's what they clean, every month. And that I know for sure is less than 15%, but they're doing what's appropriate for their system. So I think that's something to consider, is kind of those thresholds from that, because some of these smaller communities, just because of the nature of their size, they're not going to see that. And so they're going to always be violating, even though they're doing maintenance that's appropriate for their scale.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Sharon.
Yes, hi, thank you. I had a question about the let's see, the public health one where you mentioned that CECs might be an indicator. And I think I'm a little bit confused what the linkage would be between a direct impact on public health from CECs that might be in, in our effluent, for instance. And I guess I would think it would be more like a public health indicator, might be more something like a spill that, like an overflow that's in the street in a neighborhood. There's a lot more potential for direct public contact that, is a primary concern to us. For instance, if we have a spill and we're trying to clean up and make sure there's no exposure. So I guess I'm kind of confused about where the CECs come into the picture in this. I mean, obviously big picture, yes, but we don't have any standards for them, which is why they're considered emerging. So I don't really know how you would use them as some sort of indicator.
Yeah, and this might be, I mean, honestly, this might be one where it was grouped like this originally, but I think honestly it almost makes more sense as an operational variable looking at the concept here is that if a system has constituents of emerging concern present, there might be additional regulatory, thresholds that they're going to have to comply with that are going to be more complicated for the system to comply with in the future. And so from that framing, it's more of an operational risk variable. I think it was originally placed here because it originally had kind of come to us as a public health concern. But yeah, I understand your question, and it might make sense to reorganize it.
Well, I just think that, I mean, there are a lot of CECs that, I mean, if you monitor with sufficiently low levels of detection, you're going to find them in almost all wastewater because they're coming from the human body or from commonly used consumer products and things like that, like such as PFAS, and even, pharmaceutical, trace pharmaceuticals. You're going to find them almost everywhere in wastewater. So it's not a surprise, but there's not a lot, that we don't have a lot of tools to address some of those things at this time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, let me say, I mean, there's a few different things going on. Ultimately, it's going to be the board's decision on the inclusion of a risk factor around CECs here. As to the categories, yeah, I mean, I think it fits here. But again, you can argue about the categories and overlap between some of the indicators across the categories. All day we want to hear people's input, but ultimately we just have to make decisions. And the categories are a little bit fungible, or again, they could be further discussed, but we just have to make an initial decision. Certainly, we're including the other public health related factors, and as Grace mentioned, the whole project is not even explicitly about protecting the environment and public health. So those factors are included. But I think, yeah, as to there are lots of CECs, long lists of them, and which to be included. It would have to be a select list, and yes, it would have to be, provisional or standards derived in scientific literature, that are again one risk factor among many, not in any sense getting at labeling a system as inadequate here. But I understand we've heard previous feedback from some folks that they wouldn't advise that. So we've heard that. For now, it's still on the list, but we'll have to be more specific, and the board will have to make a decision, and that there will be additional conversation with this group on that.
Yeah. All right, and we have to move on for time. But if you guys, if anyone wants to join the office hours, really encourage you to join. They've been extremely useful, I think, both for the project team and advisory group members. So thank you for your feedback, and I'm going to pass it off.
All right, thanks, Grace. My name is Caitlin. I am a research engineer at the Office of Water Programs. I'm going to be giving an update on the solutions framework for Phase 1E, and then I'll pass it off to my colleague, Jonathan Kaplan, to go over the cost assessment portion of Phase 1E. So just as a reminder, the solutions framework is a modeling of solutions to address the facilities that are deemed inadequate. So we're not doing specific solutions for OTS, but that part is incorporated within the groundwater impacts assessment, which is in the report, and we presented on it last AG meeting. So today I'm going to be going over the solution development process, which is mainly what we presented on when we first talked about this topic, because we weren't quite as far along. I'm going to be giving a brief overview of the solutions we selected. And again, it's similar to what Grace said with chaotic tables that are a little difficult to present in a short presentation, but they'll be in the report. And then if anybody has additional questions or want to get deeper into it, maybe we can talk about that at office hours. And then the proposed process for assigning solutions for different facilities and collection systems. All right. So again, to just go over how we developed the solutions, we started with looking at the inadequacy criteria that Grace just presented, and we also took a look at the corresponding CWICs and then EPA violations for those to try to come up with potential underlying causes for the inadequacies. Again, when we do this, it's a very high level assessment, so we're not going to be able to predict what exactly is happening at each facility, but by looking at some patterns, we can come up with an idea of what might be going wrong and then use that to develop a solution. So we use those potential causes to develop a list of modeled solutions that could address these inadequacies. All right. And then looking at the inadequacy criteria, we kind of came up with a few categories of just general causes of the inadequacy. So a lot of them, like the effluent violations we just discussed, indicate a treatment deficiency for some of the treatment plants. So something is happening within the treatment process that's causing the treatment plant to not have adequate removal of their constituents, and they're unable to meet their discharge requirements. In other cases, there are infrastructure deficiencies. So potentially the capacity of the system isn't enough to treat the wastewater volume it's receiving. There's also operational deficiencies. This kind of goes with the collection systems and maybe their inability to clean up spills appropriately, or just improper maintenance, and that leads to improper functioning. And then we have administrative deficiencies. So this is kind of covering the monitoring and reporting violations or their inability to respond to regulatory action. Oh, whoops. So we started by looking at facilities that we already have violation data for and kind of looking at the different possible combinations of these violations. So we found a lot of facilities that had reporting violations only. We found a lot that just had only effluent violations. You know, some common ones are total suspended solids, settable solids, biological oxygen demand, and carbonaceous oxygen demand. And then we also found some that have some effluents and flow, and then some significant effluent violations and chronic effluent violations. And the reason we looked at the combinations was we kind of wanted to get a sense of, well, what we found is there's going to be facilities that their deficiencies are mainly administrative. There's facilities that really only have treatment infrastructure operational deficiencies, but maybe their reporting is fine. And then there's also going to be facilities that have a mix of both. So that kind of informed our solution approach, because there are going to be facilities that are going to have multiple different solutions that are going to be combined into one, because we can't address technical or, treatment and infrastructure deficiencies with administrative solutions. So because of that, we kind of narrowed down this idea of having a solution package, which is going to be a package of what we're referring to as remedial actions, which are kind of individual actions that will address a specific inadequacy criteria. So we're going to kind of package all these up. We're going to have our applicable treatment infrastructure operational solutions that kind of forms our more technical solution. And then that's going to be combined with the applicable administrative solutions. And that will be our solutions package, which will be what we estimate the cost of. All right, so I'm going to go and talk a little bit more about what these actual remediation actions are. And I'm going to start with the treatment facilities. So this is going to be for both the WDR and the MPDS facilities. So when we're looking at assigning a solution, it's kind of going to depend on two things. It's going to be dependent on the presumed cause of the inadequacy criteria. So why was it classified as inadequate? And then also the facility type, because the solution you'd be considering is going to differ based on if you have a pond system or if you have an activated sludge system. So we've gone through our facilities list and assigned a type based on the treatment technologies they list in their permit, and then some other information and data we had from the state. So just to give you an idea, I have two examples over here. And in this table, we have the violations. So these are common combinations of violations that we saw when we were looking through the data. And then we've assigned an assumed cause. So for the first one, it has flow violations, suspended solids, organics, which is the BOD, COD violations, and then some nitrogen violations. And our assumed cause for this facility would be that it's periodically hydraulically overloaded. That means it's receiving a flow that it can't quite handle, and it's having washout in its treatment ponds. And because of that, you're washing out the solids, and it's unable to achieve the adequate level of biological treatment. So that's our assumed cause, and that's what we're going to use to model our solution. And then the second one is similar. It's just without that flow violation. So the facility is having trouble with their biological treatment, but it's likely because there's some other option, there's some other cause or issue besides the higher flows. And so we use these, and we did this for all of the common violation combinations, all of the facility types, and we use these to identify remedial actions commonly used to address each cause. And from this, we have like matrices where we have the violation combinations, the assumed cause, the facility type, and we have a menu of remedial actions. And the menu of remedial actions are what we're using to create the treatment solution package. So here's an example of the table. It's kind of a shrunk version, but again, the full tables are in the report, and I'd be happy to go over them more if people are interested in the office hours. But again, you can see we have our violations, our assumed cause, our facility type, and then we're going to go through and assign different remedial actions to address each assumed cause. So for example, the first one is the one we just discussed where the facility is periodically hydraulically overloaded. So in this case, it's likely that there's some infiltration and inflow in the collection system if it's receiving high fluctuations in flows. So that would be assigned remedial action. We might consider installing a storage basin to help accommodate those excess flows at times. And then we might look into rehabbing the treatment ponds, like desludging it and just kind of resetting those to provide more adequate treatment. All right. This slide, sorry, it's a lot of text, but these are all the remedial actions for the treatment plants that we're considering. And again, these will be assigned dependent on facility type and then the specific inadequacy criteria. And these are going to be combined into that facility's specific treatment package. And all of these, when we scale them to assign a cost, they'll be scaled by design flow, with the exception of infiltration and inflow repair, which is going to be assigned by or scaled by miles of pipe. And one note on that, so it is like in our facilities list, we've had the collection systems and we've kind of separated them from the treatment plants, but in reality, there's a lot of, inadequacy in the collection system directly impacts the plant. So we're still trying to kind of flesh out how we're going to address plants that are having operational issues or it's likely because their collection system has a lot of infiltration and inflow and is inadequate. But we're still trying to work on how we're going to address that and not double count. All right, and then there's two other solutions for facilities. And in some cases, you're going to have a facility that it's either all their infrastructure is relatively old and outdated. And if you're going to have to go through and do several remedial actions, it might be worthwhile to just replace the entire facility. And in this case, we're gonna come up with some packages that are basically like an average cost of what it takes to replace a certain facility type. And then we're going to compare that to the cost of connecting them to another facility so that we would decommission the old wastewater treatment plant and send the flows to a new one. And that will depend on if there's a adequate treatment plant within a certain distance that you're able to actually do that. And if not, we would consider the facility replacement instead of just going through and doing a bunch of like like band-aids of the remedial actions. It might just be best to replace the whole facility. And we've seen examples of that in some engineering reports. All right. And then, yeah, just go through the process. I just discussed a little bit about how we're going to actually package these together. So we're going to have an adequate facility. We're going to go through our remedial actions table, create that package, estimate the cost of that. And then we're also going to have a separate cost for facility replacement for that facility type, compare them. And if the cost of remedial actions is comparable and we're still working on a threshold for this, to the cost of just an entire facility replacement, that we're going to go through and look, is it feasible to connect this to another facility? And if it is, then that's what we're going to go with. If it's not, then we'll look into just replacing the facility as a whole. And then if the remedial actions are significantly cheaper, then we're just going to go with those and go with that package. Right. Did I skip a slide? No. Okay. So moving on to the collection systems. The solutions we're looking at for this to address infrastructure and operational inadequacies are either a focused pipe replacement. So this is spot replacing pipes or lining pipes that exceed their useful life. And the scaling factor of that would be miles of pipe beyond useful life. And then kind of the step up from that, and we're still working on the threshold of how we're going to decide between if we're just going to do a spot treat, like focused pipe replacement versus a widespread rehabilitation and widespread pipe replacement. So this would be replacing a significant portion of the pipes, the ones beyond their useful life. And within this, we'd also include a monetary allowance for constructing new utility holes and other infrastructure. And the scaling factor, that would be miles of pipe of the collection system, which we have from the questionnaire data. And then in some cases, we might have to reconstruct some pump stations, either replace or rehabilitate them. So for that, it would just be replacing those pump equipment, installing monitoring and control equipment, repairing and installing a backup power supply, and scaling factor for that would be number of pump stations, or average pump station age. We're still kind of deciding between those two. And then we have remedial action for operational improvements. And this would just be to a response to the facilities that are inadequate because of inadequate spill cleanup or other things that are just indicating that it's not necessarily they need an infrastructure upgrade, but they just need assistance with operating and maintaining their system. So for this, we're looking to, for example, either replace or augment their spill cleanup, maintenance or inspection equipment, or possibly upgrade a SCADA system for them. And by that, we're probably going to scale it based on the size of the collection system, so miles of pipe. And then going into the administrative solutions. So as I mentioned earlier, these will be combined with the treatment and infrastructure or infrastructure and operational solutions for either the facilities or the collection systems. And these, we're happy for any feedback on these. This has been probably the more difficult one to kind of come up with because it's hard to get cost data or examples in engineering reports from these. But the solutions we're looking at are technical assistance. So similarly to the drinking water needs assessment, this would be a monetary allowance to obtain technical assistance. And for example, this could be used to address monitoring and operational issues. So any facilities that have deficient reporting, this would be a solution they are assigned. Or it could be to conduct an I&I or source control study for the collection systems or develop an SSMP. So this is really to address the inadequacy criteria that are more reporting or like planning and annual reporting related. Administrative assistance. So this is just monetary allowance to help them improve their SCADA software or develop databases and reporting outlines. And we're hoping to include some sort of allowance for training, but again, we're still looking into how to cost that. Administrator appointment. So this would be an interim administrator appointed by the State Water Board, and then operational assistance. So this would be a monetary allowance to either employ a contract operator, specifically in cases where we're upgrading the facility and it's going to be a higher grade. And then to kind of just go through the process of how these solutions are going to be assigned one more time. So we're going to have our inadequate facility, and this is just referring to the treatment facilities. We have a separate workflow for the collection systems. So for this, we're going to have our inadequacy criteria that are either related to treatment or infrastructure deficiencies. And we're going to separate those from the administrative related inadequacy criteria. We're going to go look at the treatment or infrastructure deficiency criteria to assign either a remedial action package, facility replacement, or facility to facility connection. And then in the case where we do decide, or it is assigned facility to facility connection, that is just the assigned solution. We're not combining that with any administrative solutions. But in the case that it's either a remedial action package or a facility replacement, it'll be combined with the assigned administrative solutions, which we just discussed, so the technical administrative assistance, appointed administrator, or operational assistance. And then those will be combined. And so the assigned package is either going to be, the assigned solution is either going to be facility to facility connection, or it's going to be a remedial action package plus administrative solutions. And then for the collection systems, I'm sorry, that should say SSGO. We're going to look at, it's a little bit simpler. We're just going to look at their inadequacy criteria that corresponds to either infrastructure or operational deficiencies, and then assign the infrastructure or operational solutions. And then we're going to separately look at the inadequacy criteria that correspond to administrative deficiencies, assign those solutions, and then combine them. And that is the solution that will be assigned and costed for the estimate. Right. And then we just wanted to go through a quick example because we just dropped a lot of information on you, and I would completely understand if you're lost and don't quite understand what we're getting at. So we just want to go through an example. This is a scenario where we have a conventional pond facility that has chronic flow, total suspended solids, and biological oxygen demand, and deficient reporting. So again, we have kind of our treatment related ones, which is going to be that chronic flow, the TSS, and the BOD. And then we also have our administrative, which is that deficient reporting. So to address the chronic flow, we're going to look at the collection system and see if we need to do some I&I repairs to kind of mitigate the fluctuations of flow. And then we're also going to consider adding a storage basin. And then looking at the TSS and BOD, we can see that there's some inadequate settling or biological treatment of the system. So we're going to look into desludging the pond and also installing a liner, not necessarily to improve the treatment, but it's kind of best practice in the industry. And if you're already going to be desludging the pond, you might as well, to protect groundwater. And then also to really make sure we're not having any TSS violations, installing a flotation or filtration system. So those are our remedial actions. And then to address the deficient reporting violations for this system, we're going to assign technical assistance if it's a disadvantaged community, and we're also going to assign administrative assistance, so maybe upgrading their SCADA or monitoring software. And then the technical assistance would really be to help them kind of come up with a monitoring and reporting plan. And so our solution package would be just both the treatment and infrastructure solution, and then also the administrative solution. And that's all I have. And I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk about how we're going to estimate costs for these.
Thank you, Caitlin. Jonathan Kaplan, also with the Office of Water Programs, and I will be talking about the cost assessment methodology that we put together. Next slide. Thank you. Just to reiterate something we've heard before, just want to clarify that the cost assessment, what it is and is not, it's an informative analysis of estimated costs statewide, evaluating a narrow range of possible solutions. We recommend that communities should, conduct a detailed evaluation of their unique wastewater challenges in order to identify a range of possible solutions and costs to select the best path forward. What this assessment is not is intended to be used by the state board or any community to inform community level decisions. Again, this is at a very high level. And so in order to provide that assessment, we have to keep it at that high level. So it includes many assumptions about local needs, capacities, and solutions. And so we clearly do not want this to be used by the board or communities to inform their decisions at the community level. It's also not intended to be used by the water board to make funding and assistance decisions. Again, those would have to be done on an individual basis with individual assessments of those particular systems and facilities. Next slide, please. The cost study has been mentioned. An assessment is going to be primarily based on the DFA engineering reports. We have approximately 200 of those to sift through. Those projects are California specific, so they give us lots of data on cost estimates for upgrades and repairing treatment facilities, collection systems, as well as converting unsewered or septic systems or households to a sewer system. And you can see sort of how those are broken down there by different categories. We are spending a great deal of time and energy sifting through and reviewing these engineering reports to get at these various cost estimates. Next, return. Can you hit return, please? There might be some. Next slide. We will, as I mentioned, or want to reiterate, we'll be estimating cost curves with this data, as was done in past studies, given the availability of data, given the availability of information on design flow and miles of collection system available. Next slide. Thank you. And if this isn't sufficient, if the engineering reports aren't sufficient in providing us the details for all the costs, we certainly have been reviewing the scientific literature and have data from other sources that we can rely on. And ultimately, we may also be reaching out to many of you in the wastewater community to find out more about costs related to some of these solutions, primarily the administrative and managerial solutions that may arise within these solution packages. Next slide. Thank you. Just to give you a sense of some of the alternative cost curves that are out there, we are, as I mentioned, we'll be relying on this literature to fill in gaps that the engineering reports will not cover. And these are reports from both the Water Board and the Clean Water Sheds Need a survey that was done by the US EPA. There's a wealth of cost curves in there that we hope to rely upon to fill in any gaps that the engineering reports haven't filled in. Next slide. And to sort of categorize the different costs that we'll be compiling, there are capital costs, operation and maintenance costs, and then the managerial or technical assistance costs. And as is somewhat well known, the capital costs will involve the construction and installation of any treatment technology, collection system, or other infrastructure. What is was done in the drinking water needs assessment and in many, if not all of the engineering reports, is that there are additional capital costs, sometimes referred to as soft costs, that are added to the capital cost estimates. And those often entail electrical expenses, engineering service design fees, project management, permitting, construction and administrative activities that go into constructing or replacing the capital that's needed. There's also operational and maintenance costs associated with the annual consumables for these different technologies that are going to be replaced. And that's based on a 20-year annual expense consistent with the drinking water needs assessment, as well as the engineering reports as well. And then the last type of cost estimate that we'll try to derive for the solution packages, again, is the managerial assistance costs. And this deals with technical and administrative support to address the inadequacies for those systems identified in the inadequacy list. Next slide, please. To give you a sort of a rundown of how these costs will be assembled, first we will identify the line item capital, O&M, and managerial assistant costs associated with each solution package that we identify. We'll assemble those costs from DFA data in the literature, and then we'll estimate capital costs, net present value of operations and maintenance costs, and managerial costs. We'll initially put those in 2025 US dollars, but in the final report, we'll convert those to 2026 dollars so that we have the most up-to-date estimates as well. The capital costs will then get cost multipliers associated with the various soft costs, as well as any adjustments that need to be done regionally between urban, suburban, and rural. Cost estimates, we'll use RS means to do that, which is a common practice. We'll also update any costs from the past, from old engineering reports, using the California Consumer Price Index for urban consumption, as was done in the drinking water needs assessment. We'll also adjust any costs into the future using the CPIU as well. And then also account for any of other soft costs that need to be applied to capital. We'll take all of that and then add that to the net present value of operation and maintenance costs, and then the managerial assistance, and we'll get a total solution package cost. Once we have that for all the inadequate systems, we would aggregate that in order to come up with the cost of meeting or addressing these inadequacies. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As you saw the example earlier, we'll just go through an example as well. The same one, there's a conventional pod facility that has chronic flow issues, TSS and BOD violations, as well as deficient reporting violations, as noted a few minutes ago. The identified remedial actions are I&I repairs to the collection system, installing a storage basin, desludging the pond, poly-selling the liner, as well as the flotation and infiltration system. Next slide, please. As we saw earlier as well, there's a treatment solution component as well as a managerial assistance solution, which just follows from our earlier slide. And as mentioned, that comprises our solution package. Next slide, please. So for that particular package, we have different I&I repair costs, effluent filtration costs, basin sludge removal, liner installation costs, and presumably those would all be scaled on million gallons per day based on flow rate. Some of those capital cost improvements or updates or changes have O&M costs associated with them. Not all of them do. And so as we go through the costs, we're identifying those solutions elements within the package that have O&M costs. Those two would be aggregated to come up with the total O&M costs. The total capital cost would be a summation of those individual capital expenditures as well. And we would obviously add the soft costs to those capital costs. We would then associate that with managerial costs, as you see in the right-hand side of the figure. And so these would be, depending on the flow for the particular system that we're looking at, would determine our total capital, total O&M, and our managerial assistance costs. We'd sum those up, and we would have our cost for that solution package for a particular facility. Next slide, please. Just to get a little bit deeper into these soft capital cost calculations, here's a breakdown based on some of the work that's been done in the drinking water needs assessment. These percentages here for the various soft capital costs are hypothetical. We are reviewing the engineering reports and in order to come up with the necessary percentages to use for wastewater treatment. These are arbitrary, but in order to incorporate the installation, electrical and general sites, overhead profit contingencies, and so on, we would apply different multipliers in the same fashion. Consumables would be considered part of the regionally and inflation adjusted treatment costs. We would then add a charge for overhead and profits for construction, contingency, in order to get our total capital costs, construction capital costs, and then we would add additional costs on top of that for planning and engineering, legal administration, compliance and permitting, and any construction administration in order to come up with our total capital costs. And again, this follows from the methodology used in the Water Board's drinking water needs assessment. Next slide, please. There's still some topics that we're sort of ironing out. As Caitlin mentioned earlier, we may be evaluating whether to replace a facility or connect it to another facility. We need to have sort of a trigger or threshold to decide whether and when replacing a facility is close in cost to regionalization or connection to another facility. Similarly, we have a threshold for collection systems. What hasn't been discussed much now, but will be discussed after our break, are unsewered systems and how those would be grouped together in order for us to identify connecting from septic to a sewer system that's in existence already, or whether to do septic to a community cluster system that's S2CC, or whether to not connect or build a package system for these on-site or unsewered communities or groupings. There's also non-economic factors that we may want to incorporate into the solution package selection. As was done in the drinking water needs assessment, there was a criteria for sustainability. We've seen in many of the engineering reports, there are also criteria for selecting different solutions. These range from climate change impacts, operational simplicity, the footprint for the facility, reliability, future regulations of compliance. I have a whole long list here, but we need to define what the evaluation criteria will be for selecting one solution versus another, if there are important factors other than the cost of the solution. And then, as Caitlin mentioned as well, there's still a little bit of uncertainty about managerial or technical or administrative assistance. And as we iron that out, we hope to be clarifying that in the near future and hopefully talking with many of you about what that might look like and how much it might cost. And last on my list here before we head off to questions are those capital costs or soft cost multipliers. We are sifting through the engineering reports to sort of define those as well. And so we're still working on those aspects of the solution costs. And on that note, next slide, we are ready for a break. But if there's any questions with the solutions or the costs, I presume we can take those now.
I think we could take a few, but we'll have to reserve most of them for office hours. I do want to also just call out the massive, I know it's a lot of detail, it's unavoidable, but the massive amount of work and really invention that had to be done here to make things coherent, and also to go I do want to say well beyond the complexity of the number of solution types and packages and cost estimates that's done in the drinking water needs assessment, given the complexity of wastewater systems and facilities. So just want to give a shout out to the folks who really did the heavy lifting there. But with that, I do see Paul has a hand raised, and maybe we can do one or two other questions, but I'll defer to Ariana on our timing.
Yeah, we can
Go ahead,
take
Paul.
Paul's question.
On this slide, what does S2CC stand for? I think you said, but it went too fast for me.
Septic to community cluster. The idea is to create a system of its own for these unsewered communities.
Okay, and I understand that Caitlin, you're talking about costs, and Caitlin is talking about needs. And you multiply the number, like the number of pump stations that need to be replaced by your cost per pump station. And you would multiply the number of septic areas that need to be replaced by your cost for one of these three options. What is the process to identify the number of septics that need to be replaced?
Hopefully we'll learn more about that after the break. There is work going on by the UMass folks to identify unsewered sites throughout California. And once we have that, we're going to be able to potentially group those into clusters to identify whether they can be connected to a sewer system, or they are, because of environmental or other constraints, need to be a standalone community cluster system.
Are you assuming that they are all inadequate, or some percentage of them are inadequate?
None of them are inadequate. We're not assuming any of them are inadequate. We are looking at as much of the unsewered systems as possible. There's no designation of inadequate at all related to unsewered systems.
But my understanding of SB 1215 is they're talking about addressing inadequate aughts and leaving the adequate aughts alone. So it seemed, and my understanding is Amherst is not looking at that distinction. So we need that step of finding which ones are inadequate rather than replacing them all.
Yeah, I would propose, I'm going to say we should continue this conversation really at the end of this call, because let's hear on the UMass Amherst work, although it doesn't answer all of your questions, but we can also, it will answer some in terms of what we're able to do. And I can again say we're not labeling in this project. We have not been asked to label aughts as inadequate, and we're certainly not looking to estimate or propose in any way the replacement of all aughts. Again, we can talk about what we can model and what we can't, and in the solutions and cost estimate more fully after we get the UMass presentation.
Thank you, Paul. And with that, I do think, for the sake of time, we can take our break now. But of course, as we've mentioned, we'll be having the office hours, and the dates have been provided, and the calendar invites should be on your calendar already. Please let me know if they're not. And we can discuss further there. But now we'll take a break. We'll return at 11:40 for to continue the discussion on aughts. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna stop the recording now and restart it once the break is over. And thank you to our presenters, of course. That's a lot of material, and thank you to our advisory members for listening in and absorbing and always coming with questions to help improve the process. Okay. I'll give folks maybe 1 minute to return from wherever they may be, so that we can start the presentation with University of Massachusetts. Yeah, we'll go until 11:41. All right, it's 11:41. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Nelson to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Ariana. So hi, everyone. Really excited to share about the work that UMass has been doing related to unsewered areas in California. And we'll be talking a bit about our model for that today. Next slide, please. So I first want to give some motivation behind why we are using a model for unsewered areas. So first, many households in the state, they're reliant on on-site wastewater treatment and disposal systems. And the support and potential integration of on-site system reliant households into larger systems is one of the focuses of the wastewater needs assessment. But the State Water Board does not have a database, ground truth, or projected set of on-site systems for the state that's, for example, similar to something like the Aquifer Risk Map. And the board will have received available ground truth data for sewered areas from the regional boards by the end of 2025, but we cannot be 100% assured of the comprehensiveness of those. So the UMass unsewered model and its development for California has been commissioned by the Wastewater Needs Assessment to fill a key gap. So before we get too far into some of the details, some caveats and important pieces of information to keep in mind about the model and this overall approach. So when we have a model, the predictions that are made by models, they're good approximations to the best of our knowledge. They're not necessarily a guarantee of 100% accuracy or anything like that, but with the information that we have, they're good approximations to the best of our knowledge. The model that we're going to be presenting about is not going to be used as part of the wastewater needs assessment to inform regulatory actions or identify concern labels. In relation to privacy concerns, the model is not going to publicly display parcel level information in the wastewater needs assessment or elsewhere. And finally, the model fills a data gap in the absence of complete ground truth data for unsewered areas. In the future, if California has complete data on aughts and other unsewered system solutions, then there would not be a need for the model in the future. Next, please. The model that we're presenting today, it uses machine learning. What machine learning is, I think it's important to describe that. So it's part of the artificial intelligence field, and Specifically, it focuses on the development of computer programs that are able to access data and then use it to learn for themselves. What this does is it enables the analysis of massive quantities of data, and ultimately we can summarize that as pattern matching. So it's essentially machine learning is the ability for a computer to do advanced pattern matching based on large quantities of data. Next, please. So I'm going to go step by step through this diagram of how our approach works. And there are three key elements to how the approach works. So in the first, we have different data sources and data processing. The core unit that we look at for the model is the individual land parcel or plot of land. And for each parcel across the entire state of California, we calculate a set of variables or features related to that individual parcel based on the data sets that are shown in the large horizontal box on the top of the screen. That includes things like from road networks, the density of roads nearby to that parcel, whether places are incorporated or not, or designated as places by the US Census, some features from the US Census American Community Survey related to things like housing age and the number of rooms or bedrooms in buildings in a given area, distance to wastewater treatment facilities, information about building density, so how many buildings are in a given area close to an individual land parcel, as well as parcel value data about how much the parcel has been worth monetarily. We take all of those pieces of information for an individual land parcel, and we end up tying that data to that land parcel. So we get a parcel that has features associated with it. So that's broadly step one. With that information about what these parcels look like across all of these different features, that's interesting, but it doesn't give us an answer for whether things are served by sewer or on-site systems. So what we do is we take a set of parcels that have features associated with them, and then we take what we call labels for parcels that we know are either served by sewer or some sort of on-site system, and we tie those two pieces of information together. And then once those pieces of information are tied together, then we're able to build a machine learning model. We do this for this particular model in two stages. In the first stage, we categorize areas as having a need for sanitation infrastructure or not. And then in the second stage, if a place is identified as having a need for sanitation infrastructure of some kind, then we categorize it as served by an on-site system of some sort or served by a sewer connection. Another way to put that is essentially with these parcels with the features associated with them, and then the additional information about the sewer and on-site parcel labels, the model that we use, we train it, so we teach it, okay, this is what parcels that are usually served by sewer look like. These are ones that usually served by on-site look like in terms of the data that is associated with them. We then test our model to see if it's performing adequately. And then once we are satisfied with how the model is working, then we're able to infer the coverage of sewer systems and, more importantly here, on-site systems throughout California. Next slide, please. I want to state a few things that are not included in the model. So we had the set of features in that box on the top box in the middle on the last slide. And you may be wondering, well, what about these other things that could factor into that decision? So this is a list of those things, including things like soil type, land cover, access to cell phone towers, internet access, census block population, employment status, commute time to work, permitted flow of wastewater facilities, and land slope. And I think it's important to note here that many of these pieces of information could be really useful in making predictions of whether a place is served by sewer or on-site in a specific local context. But based on our analysis, they were not useful for that purpose in a statewide model. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how what the model ends up outputting. So I have some terms here. The model, it makes classifications and it generates labels in two stages. In the first stage, as I said, it's yes or no. Yes, there's a need for sanitation system on this parcel, and no, there's no need for a sanitation system for this parcel. And then in stage two, it is two categories of sewer, which is this parcel is served by a wastewater collection system, such as a sanitary sewer. And then on the other side, on-site, which means this parcel has a sanitation system, but it's not served by a collection system. And this includes things across the range of things like septic tanks, cesspools, leach fields, and other things like that. Next slide, please. So what does our model output for each individual land parcel? It first gives us a prediction in the second stage of whether something is served by sewer or on-site. And it also gives us a confidence value. What this confidence value is how the model expresses the certainty about what class the input data belongs to. So for example, on a scale of 0 to 100, how confident are we that this parcel is served by a sewer system or an on-site system? Accuracy is not a direct model output, but we're able to calculate accuracy if we can compare to ground truth data. Accuracy in this context is a measure of how many predictions are correct out of the total number of predictions that the model makes. A bit of an imperfect analogy here, but if we think about a target, accuracy would be saying we can look at the target and confirm that we hit the target in the bullseye. On the other side, confidence would be saying something along the lines of, even though we can't see the target, based on what we know about other targets and how we approach this target, we're 85% sure that we hit this bullseye. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we use a variety of sewer and on-site labels to train and then test our model. We use data from several places throughout California, as well as some other places throughout the country, but I'm going to focus on the ones in California here for a few moments. What is shown on the map on the right are counties where we have, in California, where we had more than 200 labels of either on-site or sewer available to us. And then what we do when we train the model is we use some amount of the labels available to us in California to train the model, to help it be able to learn what the patterns are that it should be looking for. And then we held out another amount in order to be able to test the accuracy. So what we can see on the farmost right column of this table, that we have a range of accuracies across these different counties, ranging from around 65% all the way up to 95%. But the majority of these are in the mid 80s to 90s range, with an overall accuracy for these of around 94%. So based on this performance in these different places, we are able to say, okay, this approach of modeling, it is giving us acceptable information that we can use. So we're going to proceed and make predictions in other places. Next slide, please. So this slide shows model predictions at the county level for all of the different counties in California of what our model predicts the percentage of sewer served parcels of sanitation served parcels in each county are on the left. And then on the right side, we have our prediction confidence, which again is how confident our model is in the predictions that it made in any given place. From this, we can see that there are some places where the model is more confident than others. And we have ongoing efforts to try to collect data and in some of these other places to help improve confidence. Next slide, please. So we're going to hop into some breakout room discussions where we hope to give everyone an opportunity to ask some clarifying questions, share reactions, give suggestions, specifically about how we present the model and any thoughts about how the data should ultimately be presented publicly and anything that we may want to consider in terms of privacy protection. So I am going to ask Ariana to help us go into those breakout rooms, and we will take it from there.
Thank you, Nelson. And I see people are already joining. So just go ahead and accept. Anna has let you into a room. And if somehow you get kicked out of the breakout rooms while you're there, Anna will be waiting in the main room and can help you get back into whichever room you belong in. But we will see you in there. Thank you very much. Oh, and for members of the public and State Water Board members, you are not assigned to a breakout room. They're just for advisory group members, but the breakout room should only be 15 minutes and the team will be returning then to discuss what we talked about in the room. So I'm gonna stop recording, but we will be back shortly. Thank you.
Is a heightened button to make sure we're getting it right. And so kind of like into your question of how do we present this publicly once it's done, I mean, I tend to think there needs to be layers upon layers of vetting to make sure it's right because it is first of its kind and it's novel and it's new and we're not used to it as a wastewater sector and trying to find that intersection of the academic work and bridging it to the on the ground engineering efforts and management of these systems. I think that's important.
That's a very good point, Jared. Thank you for bringing it up. And actually, after the board meeting on July 16, we had an all-day in-person meeting. Morning, it was internal discussion, and the afternoon was with executive management and one of the board members. And yes, that exact question was discussed of how carefully we need to be with the iterations of this releasing this publicly, this list and everything. So yeah, so there's going to be very careful considerations taken of and iterations of how the process will go for releasing this list and everything.
Thank you, Jared and Danya. And I know the breakout rooms, I'm sure we all could have spent more time in there, but we are coming up on the clock. And I just want to say that this is the first time presenting on this model, but in phase 2, we'll have multiple opportunities to give updates at advisory group meetings. And for phase one, it was just a year for the advisory group meeting. So we had to fit all of phase one into 1 year of meetings. Phase two, we'll have 2 years of meetings. So hopefully that can ease some comments or anxiety around getting everything we need to say out right now. But yeah, I wanted to call on the various rooms so that they could share what we discussed. Jared was in the room I was in, but I want to see if Debbie, you have any other points that you wanted to share with the rest of the team that we discussed.
Sure, and thanks for taking great notes. So it makes things easy. So there would just we did talk about this issue of that some aughts have permits, some of these other aughts, small aughts may not. So usually the bigger ones, like some of the bigger mobile home parks, will have it, and how there's not that connection yet, but maybe there will be. So there's, it's potentially a future where it's going to be cut. Let me put it this way: it's going to be covered in the project, but the degree as to what things are going to be covered would be different. And then once this work is done, it'll go to the regional boards, and they'll start looking at it and trying to vet some things out and do some validation for that. And then we were talking about just really even on the validation with counties and others is, how good can we make that, because many of them don't have information that goes that far back. What kind of stuff can you do without really having to go to homeowner? And so overall, this is going to be, great information, but as you probably heard Jared say as we were going on there, is that yes, it's the first, it's great, this is where we're going, but it's, it will have its limitations, and I think and we'll have further iterations after that, and just to be cognizant of that. So I have to ask the rest of the group if I captured that okay. So okay.
That was great. Thank you, Debbie. And I think I'll pass it to breakout room number 2. And it looks like Matt will be presenting or reporting for them.
So in our discussion about how clear is the framing of the unsewered model to us, the binary yes, no worked really well for understanding, breaking it down to just a yes or no. It was good. The concerns, people were, initially had questions about how AI was going to be used, and that was addressed in the modeling. So that was appreciated, as well as making sure that all the inputs, data inputs were correct, and vetting that out. And then clearly delineating, which topics and data were excluded. That was helpful, stating that, that the statewide didn't need to use some of that data, but it could be used for regional. I think that was important to bullet point that out, to say, we understand that this is a concern, but it's not going to be used in our statewide model. The infographics help for visual learning and understanding. That was really appreciated. And then we also talked about in the end product, to make sure that, stating the purpose, and then how the groundwater risk assessment will be used in regards to all this modeling, kind of just make sure that that's highlighted, and which, we're assured that it would be, but just to make sure that that's highlighted in the information that's going out. And then we addressed the accuracy being low in some of the counties, and that's in part, to being short on some ground truth data and sewer label data that will be available later this year. So I think that covers everything that we talked about.
Hey, Matt. Are there any other members from that breakout room who had additional thoughts that they wanted to share, or additional points? Okay, I'll pass it to breakout room 3, where it looks like Paul is the reporter.
Okay, it seems we didn't have any concern, or people didn't express any concerns about the techniques of building the model. We accepted it's a model, it's doing its best. In terms of presentation, we thought it was really important to describe how it will be used. And that's whether that's going to be done by that description needs to come maybe from the Amherst team, maybe from other people. But in any case, that would be very important for the understanding of the model. We also talked about the county specific information and looked for the septic specific accuracy by county, because that may be better or worse than the overall average accuracy of a county. And we're looking for, this model doesn't have nitrate data, but it sounds as if one of the goals is going to be showing where nitrate loading is a problem from on-site systems. And so we want to know where that nitrate data will come from. And there are other models that do that, but this one doesn't.
Thank you, Paul. Any other members from breakout room 3 that had additional thoughts or questions they wanted to share? Okay. I think we have maybe 5 minutes or so. If there's any other general questions or thoughts or clarifications on the unsquared model that people wanted to share with the larger group. So feel free to just raise your hand or shout out. Doesn't seem like there's any questions. And of course, we have office hours. And this won't be the last time that this is presented on. So I just want to say thank you, Nelson, Emily, and Jay, for all your work and getting us here. This is very exciting. Let's see.
Thank you all for feedback.
Okay. So that's the end of the content for this advisory group meeting. I started recording again, right? Okay, yes, I did. Thank goodness. So our next advisory group meeting will be in October. I believe the calendar invite has already been sent out to everyone, and if I'm not mistaken, it's October 24th. Yes, it is. And there we'll be doing an overview of phase 2 and all the respective parts. We're currently doing or working through a work plan. So sharing some of the key tasks and subtasks at that meeting, as well as where there's opportunities for feedback in the next 2 years for advisory group members. And with that, I just want to say thank you. I will stop sharing my screen and we could answer any broad questions. I know folks have been on since 9:15, 9:30. So if you want to jump off and ask questions via email or office hours, feel free to do so. But we'll be staying on if you do have any questions. But again, thank you so much for spending your Friday morning with us. And thank you to all the presenters for all the work that you've done to get the needs assessment to this point.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a lot of work you guys put in, so thanks.
Thanks. Happy Friday, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.